morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series where we bring together the most phenomenal leaders from across the globe and they share their career journey. And I'm super excited today because I have a former boss on, colleague from years back. Jeff Wheatman is a strategic thought leader in cybersecurity and risk management. He's currently serving as the cyber risk strategist at Black Kite. Prior to this, he was vice president and analyst at Gartner, where he advised global clients on building security programs, cybersecurity efforts, and an amazing person outside of work. So with that, I want to introduce my long time friend, Jeff. Hey, man. How you doing?
Ron, I am so excited to be here. I do a ton of these. I have not looked forward to one like this in a while. And I was not your boss. We were colleagues, friends,
I
coworkers. I
know,
don't buy that whole boss thing, right?
but
We
but
had
you
some problems we solved together.
but you said I want to hire him because I interviewed you. So that's the reference point there. So it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah.
Not only that, but Jeff's wife Deb was also a colleague because she worked with us in human resources. So this is family here that we're having today. This is a family CEO series that we're having today.
Yeah. No, that's funny. And you're right. And that's actually where I met my wife was when we all worked together at Martha Stewart.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So
exciting. And I think, Ron, you and I probably have not spoken maybe since before COVID. I think you and I had dinner in Dubai. That
yes,
might be the last time we
yes,
talked.
it
And
was.
yet we jump on and it's like we never missed a beat. I love those kind of friendships.
That's friendship, and you don't miss a beat, and it's just like sitting around having coffee. Is what I say.
Yep.
So with
Yep.
that,
Absolutely.
walk us through the journey to becoming a cyber risk strategist. How did that all start?
Yeah, so I love this because I think a lot of people who are trying to get into cyber think it's hard. Um, Back in the day, I was a network guy. I was in consulting. I worked for a consulting company. We were getting bought. They didn't want me to leave. They tucked me in this site with no work to do. And I stumbled across a website that is still around called 2600.com. And I found these columns and I taught myself how to do pen testing. It wasn't even called penetration testing at the time. And I said, this is way more interesting than what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I decided that day I was going to be a security guy.
Hmm.
And I realized I was not a great technical pen tester, but I was a really good social engineer. So I could talk to people and get them to do stuff that they should not be doing, which gave me access to stuff that I should not have access to. And that was sort of the thing. And then our mutual friend and colleague, Patrick Adam,
Pat.
brought me over to Martha,
Yeah.
where we met and worked together.
Yeah.
And I just really, I've been super fortunate. I've been able to find stuff that's interesting to me and I can get people to pay me to do it. And,
That's cool.
over the years, it's really transited more into I'm a connector and a communicator and a strategist. And I essentially help people with different backgrounds and perspectives sit down at the table and have the same conversation, specifically around technology risk. And right now, I'm spending most of my time talking about third party risk, vendor risk, and supply chain risk and helping people understand you might be perfect at protecting your own organization, but I can tell you your ecosystem, your vendors, your partners, they're not. And you don't know
Mm,
what your exposures are. So
mm.
that's really kind of my journey. I've had a bunch of stops, a bunch of great jobs, a bunch of great opportunities. Um, to travel the world and talk to people and share my mistakes, my hopes, my dreams, my aspirations. And that's
Yeah.
my career journey, man.
Yeah. Share the mistakes. You mentioned the social side, and you have personality. So we all know you have personality.
Thank you. I
So,
do
so, so
have one.
but I always thought that people come out of school and they're thinking they're going to do all these things. They're very good technically, but the social piece, connecting with people, is missing in some way, shape, or form. Can you walk us through that? Because you mentioned you were able to talk with clients and you were able to make them feel that you were listening to them. versus the technical expert is just going 1, 2, 3 with slides and walking through all this kind of thing. And you spend 20 minutes on slides and everybody says, okay.
Yeah. I think, Ron, a lot of it comes from my dad, really, who told me something when I was young. He said, any day that you don't learn something new is a waste of a day.
Uh,
And because of that, I'm interested in other people and what they do. I actually had a colleague, a person I met at a conference in Orlando last year. I struck up a conversation. We were just sitting at a table. I had a coffee. We were talking. She reached out to me last night. She said, I don't really know how to network.
oh,
And we kind of talked a little bit about it. And I said, find someone you think is interesting and go ask them what they do. Ask them what they love, where their struggles are. And I've just found that when you ask people about themselves, it gives you an opportunity to learn and broaden, but it also gives you a bridge for that communication. And I hosted my own podcast for a little while, and I'm actually super excited. We're going to be launching a brand new podcast, hopefully in October, that I'm going to be hosting with two of my amazing colleagues at work. But my whole thing was, that's really interesting. Let's talk about that. Tell me about what you do. Tell me about your day. And if you do that with enough people, you can find commonalities and you can find linkages and bring that stuff back. And then I'll just share one last thing. I was at an event in Atlanta last week, and there was a guy there, and he's the global stage guy. His name is Bronkar Lee. He's awesome. He does music and comedy and communication. And someone said, so you're very magnetic. Why is that? And he said, because I care about other people and I let them know that I care about them.
wow.
And I went, that's me, right? That's the thing. I always want to learn. Before we started the recording, we were talking about your family. We were talking about my family. And I just think that in order to be an effective communicator, you
Yeah.
really need to care about the other person. And that's something that I have always sort of brought into the core. And the older I get, the more I want to learn.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's how I kind of got there.
I thought about something that Tiger was. I saw him on an interview. He said, the older I get, the smarter my father becomes. And you're talking about what your father told you and those kind of things that as we go through life, we listen back to our fathers and mothers, what they brought us through or what they taught us, the anchor points in doing that. You talked
I would tell
about,
you, though, all
go ahead.
respect to Tiger Woods, he stole that from Mark Twain. Mark Twain has a quote that my father threw at me when I was a kid. He said,
Ah,
when
okay.
when I was 13, I could not believe how ignorant my father was. And when I turned 18, I was shocked at how much he had learned in 5 years.
That's cool. Thank you for giving me the historical perspective and the anchor point of that.
Yep.
You're done. Tiger, you're done. You're done. You're done. But doesn't that come back to curiosity? Just being curious about people, because I'm the same way. I can get in a taxi, and the taxi ride, an Uber ride, or when I'm leaving New Jersey going to JFK, and I know the driver's full life story.
Yep.
Because I'm
with you.
not the person who sits there and doesn't want to even communicate. So how long have you been doing this? How do you happen to come and doing this kind of thing? So I've always figured that asking people questions give you a better connecting point.
I agree, and I am fascinated. You talking about Uber driver. I'm fascinated because a lot of Uber drivers are not from the U.S., right, where I am. So how'd you get here? Where are you from? Oh, you're from Nigeria. Interesting. How'd you end up in Atlanta? And people have really interesting stories. I love that.
Interesting stories coming out. So there was a gentleman we had on a few weeks back, uh, high level banking executive, goes back to school, gets a PhD, becomes a college professor. And he said, you know what? I want to start driving taxi. And he started driving taxi in Dubai. And he said the stories that he would learn from people. So I say that to say, even when you're managing a team of people, listening to people that report into you. What are they struggling with? Where's their career journey headed? All those kinds of things. Again, it comes back to curiosity. And as I said, the anchor point in that is asking good questions.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Ron. The first job I really learned how to do that was at Martha. And our mutual friend who is no longer with us, Jeff Frazier, he was the guy that really taught me that. He said, "Hey, man, yeah, you're smart, whatever." He said, "but that's not why you got hired. You got hired here to solve problems. And unless you understand what the other person is doing and cares about, you can't solve their problems." And
That was
that's amazing. He's one of those guys when people ask me, who kind of inspired you and mentored. Jeff Frazier is one of those guys.
he was a dear friend. We shared an office together, and I told him one morning, I said, "You know what? They're going to put us out of here," because we would laugh all day, but we would share
Yeah.
stories. We both grew up in the South, and it was kind of that whole space of connecting with people. So how do you cyber AI, all of these kinds of things? How do you keep inspired? How do you stay ahead of the curve and all of these things that are happening in this space?
Yeah, I had this conversation with the guy I was talking to at the event last week, and I am enthralled and enchanted with what technology can do for us and with us, and where I think at a really interesting time in sort of
Yeah,
human evolution. Now, this came from a friend of mine, so I this is not my original thought, but he said in the next 3 to 5 years, we are going to make decisions that are going to influence the course of humanity. We're going to be making decisions about machines that make other machines. That is just mind expanding to me. And again, it's that curiosity, that lifelong goal, always want to be learning. If you've seen Glengarry Glen Ross, always be closing.
yeah,
For me, it's ABL, always be learning.
yeah.
And more important than that, and this is something that Deb will tell you, sometimes I can be a little pedantic, but when I learn something, I want to share it with people. Hey,
Yeah.
I just heard this really cool thing. Hey, did you read this article? Did you check this thing out? Like, I love people's eyes and the light bulb going off, going, wow, I
Yeah.
never thought about that. To me, any conversation where somebody says they never thought about that, that's a great conversation.
That's a
And
great.
and that's it. I get up every morning excited about what I get to do.
Yeah.
And that's a
Yeah.
rare thing these days for people to
Well,
love what they do. I love
yeah.
what I do. I love being able to help people. I love being able to talk to people. I love having this conversation, and I'm sure you probably don't have a ton of cyber people in your audience. So anyone out there, connect to me on LinkedIn. I post interesting stuff. Connect to me on LinkedIn. You got questions, I will absolutely jump on a call and talk to you and help you learn.
You mentioned the movie, Glengarry Ross. Love that movie. My son and I are movie freaks, and we always talk about different quotes and always be learning. And he also mentioned always be closing.
Yeah.
The always be learning piece is something that I think more people need to become aware of, because sometimes when I'm giving a speech and I'll ask, what was the last article you read that impacted you? What are you reading? How are you learning? And sometimes I get this blank space, and I'm thinking, and what we're headed into, you've got to get back into books,
Yeah.
into the podcast, into the reading, because we're facing something that we have never in the history of mankind faced before.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And so I'll share a quick story. So I was at this event in Atlanta, and there were name badges on the table. One of the name badges said Angela Davis. Now, the guy running the conference, friend Keon Williams, who actually you should have on, he's an awesome dude. He's super well connected. So I said to these young girls, I go, is it the Angela Davis? Ron, they did not know who Angela Davis was.
Wow. Wow.
And these are young Black girls. I
Yeah.
go, you need to go right now and look her up. She was a linchpin
The
in
whole
what happened
movement.
in the 1960s.
Yes.
They didn't know about the Black Panthers. They didn't know about the social justice. And I was just, that to me, that kills me. It kills me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it kills me too, because I do a lot of work with senior leaders, and I always mention articles, and sometimes I'll send articles over. They said, "Oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time to do it." I said, "Dude, you got to take time to do it, because
Yeah.
otherwise you will become obsolete, because you're not
Yeah.
staying ahead of of what's happening in outside of the domain that you're in, because we get comfortable in these zones and we just say everything is going to keep moving, towards that. So
Yeah,
who's
no,
been,
I agree, and that's what AI is actually really cool, because you can use AI to actually help. If you don't have time to read the whole thing, have it summarize it, record an audio, and listen to it when you drive it in your car.
stop it? I set up tasks in AI, and I said, send me daily, 7:30 every morning, a recap of all the articles that were published as it relates to quote unquote topic.
Right.
And every morning I
Yeah.
get up and I can read through. Some are cool, some are not cool. They send me links, everything. But when we
Yeah.
talk about careers and my daughter, I remember the conversation I had with her junior senior year. She says, when I finish college, I will never pick up a book again. She said, I am so exhausted from all of this work and all of this thing. And I said, let me give you some insight. If you want to become very good at what you do, if you want to become an expert or semi-expert, or you want to grow your career, the level of learning picks up as you get into that career, if you find out this is what you want to do.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I saw a stat a bunch of years ago. I don't know how true it is, but like 70% of people never read anything outside their job after they graduate college. That is very sad.
It is sad. But then again, we want to get rid of the Board of Education. But I just threw that out.
I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to talk about politics on camera, Ron.
Yeah, we won't go there. So you talked about your father, being influential in your life. Who else was there that you maybe mentored you, or maybe was a person who gave you insight as to how you were, or when you hit those rough spots? Who?
Yeah. So there is a guy, his name is Robert Ponte. Robert was my first manager in my first technical job. And it's funny because he literally just reached out to me last week to ask me if I knew anybody over at Martha to introduce him to him. Like, I've been out of there a long time. But I'll just share a story. So I got offered a job on a really big project. And I went to him and I said, what do you think, Robert? And he said, well, you come in early sometimes, and who's here, to people on that team. And he said, and sometimes you stay late or you go out and have drinks and dinner and you come back to get your bag. Who's here? That team. And he said, you need to know or decide what kind of life you want. And I turned that role down and people were shocked. This is such a good opportunity. And I made that decision, and I have lived my whole life. I work to live, not the other way around.
Yeah.
I am there for my wife. I am there for my kids. Now, I've been fortunate. I've had jobs that have allowed me that flexibility. So that's one person. Jeff Frazier, who we talked about, he made me realize that my job was to help other people be better at their job.
Jeff.
You and I share this story all the time. I don't know if you remember. There was an incident in Philadelphia with a young man who got shot by the police. And I asked you a question. Why was he running away? And you asked me this. How many times have you been pulled over by the police this month? And I said, what? And you said, I am a black man driving a Lincoln Continental. I get pulled over once a week. And I share that story with people all the time, because we are so focused on a privileged middle-class white man who grew up in New York City. I don't know what you went through growing up in Alabama. I don't know what anybody went through. So I asked them, tell me about it. And those are three people, I think, who, and I swear I'm not telling that story just because I'm on Ron's webinar. That is absolutely true. And I talk about that story all the time. I would say I share that story every 3 months minimally, because that was so impactful for me, going, I don't know what you went through in your life.
Exactly.
So those are three. Those are three. I mean, there are other people who kind of influence me.
Mhm.
I had a lot of mentors when I was at Martha Stewart because I work with the smartest people over there who taught me a bunch of stuff. But my dad, of course, I mentioned. My mom also. My mom really taught me empathy and sort of emotional sort of that EQ thing.
Yeah.
I learned from my kids
Yeah.
because they're growing up in a different world than we grew up in, and uh,
I learned.
and ultimately, the short answer, I want to learn something from everybody in my life every day. So
Yeah.
everyone's really my mentor.
Yeah. You mentioned your kids. I learned a lot from my kids because different era, different way they're looking at things. And my daughter, my son, they tell me things. I said, Dad, you kind of way. And I sit and listen. I don't try and challenge. I just sit and listen. I said, you know what? You're right. It's a different era. We grew up in
Yep.
different time zones and that kind of thing. So
Yep.
when you look back at your life, what is the most significant challenge you faced in building this career to cyber risk strategist, global cyber risk strategist?
That's a great question. I would say the biggest hurdle that I have faced, and it's an ongoing challenge. I like to talk. I have to work every day, pausing, waiting for the other person to talk.
Yeah.
I have to focus on listening and hearing. Um, I need to recognize the fact that even though those people may be less experienced in what I do, it doesn't mean that what they know is wrong. And I'm constantly trying to revisit that and bring in different perspectives. And that's a big chunk of what I do in my job, right? I work with our chief product officer and our COO and our CEO and our chief revenue officer. I have to pull in what they do, and our chief marketing officer. I have to pull in what they do and synthesize that into strategic guidance to help my manager, my boss, my CEO.
Yeah.
So, that's a thing. And there was one really big lesson, and this came actually from Jeff Frazier when we were at Martha. We deployed a new technology, and it had some kind of a negative impact on the users. And my approach was, well, they should. And Jeff sat me down and said, there's no they should. You are there to service them. You need to find out what they need and fix that. And
Yeah.
that was, again, paradigm shifting for me. And I share that with people all the time. Um, and yeah, and right now, the challenge I'm facing, my parents are getting older. My dad's 86, my mom's 82. We just lost my uncle a couple weeks ago. I'm now coming face to face with the mortality of those that are so important to me and that I love. And I need to be that kind of that voice of sort of calmness, and calm is not a speed I do. You get this or you get me sleeping.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure that out. And my mom is a little sensitive these days, and I need to be mindful of what I say. And we're living in very challenging times.
Yeah.
You kind of alluded to it a little bit, and I know everyone says times are challenging. I've been around a couple 24s. I turned 58 in May, and I don't know. This to me seems like a different time.
Yeah, it's something that I think we're facing. No one back through history has ever faced before. But the technology, for the most part, is kind of driving everything. I was just reading an article about Microsoft had their best earnings year, and they're the third valuation of organization, but they're still laying off people. They're trying to figure out the people component in trying to get this thing right to move forward. So if that's being disrupted from that level and that amount of revenue that's coming in, you can imagine what organizations below are going through as it
Yeah,
relates to that. But that comes back to people.
yeah,
That comes
yeah.
back to how do we manage people? What are your thoughts?
So I'm a big believer in there's a difference between managing and leading. And I think we have a lot of managers out there, and I don't think we have a lot of leaders. And I actually posted this on LinkedIn a couple months ago. It was sort of, I kind of built on something that somebody else posted, but I said, so tell me, what do you think the difference is between managers and leaders? And I heard some interesting things, right? Managers manage things, leaders manage people.
Yeah.
But to me, the main difference is a manager says, go do this. A leader says, let's go do this together.
Yeah. You tell
That to
me
me
how
is
we
the
get
biggest thing.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think leaders need to listen. I had a young guy working for me on a consulting project one time, and I saw he had something to say. I said, what do you got, Brian? And he's like, well, I don't know. And I go, listen, man, say it. There's no judgment here. We may not do what you suggest, but I can assure you that we will listen and ask questions and understand. And I don't think there's enough of that out there. I think leaders need to inspire people to greatness. I think managers make themselves better, leaders make their people better.
Mm.
I just think there are so many kind of different things that I think ultimately leaders lead by example, right? They show, here's what I'm going to do, here's how I'm going to act, and I love the expression "take my advice, I'm not using it." I think uh,
Yeah.
plays in
Yeah.
there. And I also think leaders also need to protect their people. I think that this was something that Gartner was very good at. My boss protected me from the BS coming from their boss, and I
Yeah.
think
The
that
shield.
is important. And yeah, yeah. And then I did a panel in DC a couple weeks ago, and somebody said, "What do you think needs to change?" And I said, "We need to stop blaming people every time something goes bad."
Mhm. Yeah. Stop blaming people. Let's try to get to root cause.
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
yeah. Hmm. I
Let's solve it. Let's fix this. You want to go back and figure out what happened? Let's do that, but let's fix it first.
exactly, exactly. So how would you define your leadership style in managing people?
So
You manage a
yeah,
large team, and I think in Martha Stewart, you may have had 10, 15 people in that room that we were
yeah.
together, and it's grown beyond that. How would you define your leadership style? Not from that era, but from what you're dealing with now.
Yeah. So what's interesting is I don't actually have a team now.
Okay.
I am me, right? So my leadership really needs to be about how do I get folks that work for other people to think that what I need them for is important. And again, I think a lot of it is about consensus building, understanding what's important to you. I think we need to understand how people learn. I think we need to understand how people respond. Some people, when you yell at them, that's bad. Some people respond to that,
Respond to
and you
that.
need to learn that. One of the coaches from the Dallas Cowboys a bunch of years ago, and I'm a Giants fan, so I hate to give credit for it, but he said to a reporter, if you think I treat Troy Aikman the same way as I treat a third string offensive lineman, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, the older I get, the more I also want to consider other people. So I'm going to send you, when we're done, I'm going to send you a really interesting article that I just read. It's very long, but everybody talks about EQ, right? Emotional quotient. This gentleman talked about assertiveness quotient, and he crossed them. And he gave examples. He said people that are very assertive but have low EQ are viewed as a-holes.
Yeah.
The true leaders are the folks that have high EQ and high AQ.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where we need to
Mm.
start thinking, right? Is leading by example. I think getting people on board, building consensus. I think encouraging people to share ideas, even though they may not be great ideas, they may not be things we're going to do, but maybe we pick and choose. And I think then you got to give credit, right? You got to say, so this thing came from Mary over here, so let's give Mary credit, let's give Bob credit, let's give Tony and Stephanie credit. And I don't think that we do that. I think a lot of people sort of take credit for other people's ideas, and
Yeah.
I I don't have a ton of original thought.
That's okay.
I can consolidate them,
Yeah.
and what I learned, and this was a thing that I learned as a Gartner analyst, even though there was literally no management or leadership in that role. was learning how to absorb what people say, synthesize that, and then wrapping it in my own voice and kind of sharing that out.
There we go. That's listening. You listen and
Yep.
you mix all of those ingredients together, and you were able to come out on the other side with
Yep.
a kind of a thought process. One of the things I use at Martha, which worked for me very well, and this is the first time I use it, I created kind of a pseudo board of directors. And these were people that I would go to and pull them together in a conference room and say, here's some things I'm thinking. What are your thoughts? And I'm not going to call names, but I had people that were a lot of the cleaning people, people that were in your group as IT or whatever it was. I didn't want anyone in there from management level. I didn't want any of those people there. I wanted to learn from the ground up. What can we do better? Those kinds of things. So I've always used that examples when I'm giving speeches, and people said, oh, I would never do that because you're setting expectations as a dude. I'm not talking about setting. I want to learn from the people that are
Right.
doing the work.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge problem, especially in bigger companies. I think leadership gets so far removed, they don't really understand the job anymore. And I love that. I'm big on committees, and so I'll share something interesting with you. So there's a guy on LinkedIn. I cannot remember his name, but he used ChatGPT to create his own personal governance committee. He basically said to ChatGPT, here's what I want to accomplish. ChatGPT ran him through 20 questions. He answered them honestly, and ChatGPT came back and created this board of advisors, board of directors for him that he now runs his thoughts by. And it's historical people, current people like Socrates, for example, was one of the people. I think Alexander the Great was in his group. So I'm going to actually sit down, I think this weekend, I'm going to do that for myself. I mean, it looked like it took him probably about 3 or 4 hours, and I'm, fine to make that investment. But I love that approach.
But a totally different approach from a leader years ago of
yeah.
era that we worked for. So here's a thought. This is a different scenario I want to throw you into. You're giving a speech to senior level. I always call them big shots, the big shots of the organization. What are some key thoughts? What are 2 key thoughts you would give them as it relates to managing a new workforce, because the demographics of the workforce is changing? And what advice would you give them on how do you connect? How do you get them involved, purpose-driven, whatever it would be?
Yeah. So, I mean, you nailed it, I think, which is kind of getting people together in, a no blame kind of ego free zone where people get to share their thoughts, share their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, ask them what they want from their career, ask them what they want from this job. I know it's like a hot question, where do you want to be in 5 years?
Yeah.
But I think those kinds of things are important. And I think really listening, which, we've talked about that a couple of times, it's a skill a lot of people are not great at. But I think understanding, I also think going to the sources that they're going to, like the next generation, they're not sitting and watching the 6 o'clock news. I don't even know that. I'm not even sure that's a thing anymore. But figure out where are they going to learn. And for good or bad, they're going to a lot of social media sources.
Yeah.
And we can talk about whether that's good or bad, maybe on another call. But
Yeah.
I think understanding what's important to them. I think humans have a tendency to be very sort of self-focused, right? What's important to me? I always, when I mentor and sort of ally with people, I always recommend, and it's an old book, it's super cheesy, but How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I re-listen to it every couple of years.
Yeah.
And one of the key things I was talking about is the thing that most people want to talk about is themselves.
Exactly. Tell me.
Me included, you included. So let's give them that opportunity. Tell me about yourself. What do you like? And I think you need to create a quote unquote safe space where none of this stuff is going to come back. So I have a friend of mine from my former company, and he was in this situation. He had a skip level call with his boss. He shared something that came back to bite him in his review. That's a terrible practice.
It is. Yeah.
Right. And we talked about, right, let's solve the problem, let's fix this. And then the other thing too that I think leaders need to be better at is creating very fast iterative feedback loops. That's a cool idea, let's try that. We can't wait 6 months or a year to decide if it worked. So what do we think is going to happen in 30 days in order to get where we want to be in 6 months? And I think we need to revisit that.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the technology has really caused a lot of challenges for people, and where AI, I think, is really going to be valuable, but also very challenging, is when we have these rapid feedback loops, how do we integrate that back into decision making, into strategy, into tactics? How do we figure out how to learn from those mistakes and be bigger, better, faster, more going forward? And I think that's still a big challenge organizationally. I worked for a company with 50,000 people at Gartner. I now work for a company with 150 people. The decision making is very, very different.
Yeah.
And I don't know that leaders are always great at figuring that part out. And we haven't really talked about it, but this as in what you do, culture. Peter Drucker said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast."
Exactly.
And I don't think enough people think about the culture piece.
Yeah. Culture inside of an organization. How can you? There was a research study that was done. If you look at a 4-point rating system, each rating system is worth 20%. So if you look at someone who's a level 4, they give you 120% of effort, 120, 100, 80, 60. And I always tell HR people, crunch those numbers, because those numbers will tell you something. Is that any different than a Bank of America or a Uniqlo that has 5,000 stores? What are the top performing stores? What causes them to be top performing stores? We use the same job description. We hire the same people. We train the same people. Why are they at a level 4 versus 3, 2, 1s? And I can always see kind of a light go off as it relates to how do you build that. A lot of that comes from culture. And one of the key connectivity points of that research was all of the managers had great scores as being a people manager versus I'm a people leader versus the manager says 1, 2, 3, whatever, you do this. A person say, okay, so we didn't what are your thoughts as to how we do that? And you bring more people in to help you solve the problem. Any thoughts?
Yeah, there was an article in Harvard Business Review, and it's probably 9 or 10 years ago because it was before we moved to Florida. But they basically looked at the value of a manager being liked versus being viewed as competent. And what they found was the managers that were liked were much, much more effective than those that were viewed as being competent. So essentially, to your point, the social part of it is more important than the technical expertise. And I sometimes think that the value of that is underrated, and I think we need to do that. But it's also hard. Like one of my weaknesses is that I feel like I'm mean even when I'm not. So I'm always trying to be mindful of, I'm working on a project right now with a young man in my company, and we're trying to get something done, and he gave me a first draft, and it was like, this is not. I don't think this is really where we want to be. How can we make this better? And I still feel like he's mad at me.
Because you said
right.
That.
Yeah, and it's I don't like that is definitely something I struggle with.
Yeah. But when you think of that, it's leading a project, leading people, being a CEO of a company. Everything has changed. Everything that we've learned coming up, I think sometimes it's being disrupted. So your old way of viewing problems, your old ways of trying to solve situations, demographics are different. The workforce demographics are different, and we may have to reshape or rethink.
Yeah, and the expectations are also are different. I think when we grew up, think about how many disagreements you had at the dinner table about something where you had to wait until the library opened the next day, right, to go figure that out. And
Library open.
now, hey, there you go, right? Here's, we can get an answer right now. Let's ask ChatGPT, let's ask Gemini, let's ask the Google machine. And I think that actually sounds great. But I think it also has put us in a position where I think it's called we're losing critical thinking skills.
Mhm.
There've been a bunch of articles, is AI dumbing people down? And I think to a certain extent it is, because people are just willing to kind of take things at face value without, well, where'd that come from?
Mm.
And I think part of the social media is also triggering that. I mean, how many times have you see 50 sources of something, but it turns out it's really one? So there's a current story right now. That CEO who's cheating on his wife got caught at the Coldplay concert.
Yeah,
Well, there is something circulating around that is a letter from him where he blames the band. Here's the problem. He never wrote that,
he never wrote that. Yeah,
but it's everywhere.
it's
But it's only
everywhere.
got one source.
But he's everywhere, and people read that. So this is why I say critical thinking. If you see that, did that person really say that? Could you do a little research on your own in doing that?
Right.
And I think lots of times in the social era, we see things and we take it as fact. And
Yep.
I've seen videos of AI and all these things happen. It looks so real, but it's not. No, that's not it.
And Ron, it is going to get so much worse.
It's gonna get so much worse.
So much worse. And my parents got hit by scammers last year, and I basically said to my mom, anybody calls you and says anything about money, assume they are lying. And she said, what if it's you? I said, Mom, there are thousands of hours and pictures of me online. It would be easy for a bad
You,
actor to make believe
yeah,
I'm you.
yeah,
Make believe they're me. And I think we need to get people to question, and I feel like we are raising a generation of people that don't question.
no question, no question. Yeah, that's another podcast in talking through that because we can
Yeah,
go on and on.
indeed,
Uh,
indeed.
as we begin to close out, if you could go back and offer one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be? I remember, Martha, you had just finished your MBA at NYU, was it? Whatever.
Yeah, Baruch. Yeah,
Baruch.
CUNY
Yeah, you
Baruch.
had just
Yeah.
finished your MBA, and you left maybe a year after that, and you were headed for here. If you could go
Yeah.
back to that level and say, "Well, calm down, big shot. Here's what you need to know." What would that be?
So I'm gonna give you two, and this is true for everyone. I think don't take yourself so seriously. You know, not everything that comes out of your mouth is brilliant. So that's one. And I think the other is, you know, be true to yourself. I think especially for younger people, there's a tendency to try to be what other people want you to be. And I still struggle with it to a certain extent, but I think people need to be true to themselves. You got to live with your decisions. And, I always tell people I have zero regrets in my life. There are decisions that
Yeah.
maybe if I would have made differently, things would be different. But at the end of the day, I got all my decisions, good and bad, got me here. Talking to my good friend Ron Thomas, right?
Okay.
And I always tell people you can't live your life in fear. And I'll share one last thing, and this came from our friend Jeff Frazier. Um, People tend to have one foot in yesterday, worrying about what they did, one foot in tomorrow, worrying about what they should do, and waste the day that they are in.
Uh, I posted something online the other day, a graphic, and I was in India, and I just saw it posted in the groups, one of the groups there, and it said the largest burden we carry are thoughts in our head.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking, wow, that is so powerful because I talk to people, people reach out, they're dealing with this and they're dealing with that or whatever. That's so okay, cool. So what are your plans to do? Move it away from there, but
right.
all of the thought process is based on that issue.
Yeah. And I think we're in a society now where, there's a lot of issues with I don't want to say mental illness, but people suffering with their mental health. And I always tell people depression is what happens when you look backwards and regret your decisions.
Mm.
Anxiety is what happens when you look forward and worry about them. And I'm not saying clinical depression or anxiety disorder. I'm not minimizing that. I think we have a tendency to do that. But the sort of conceptual things there, like people don't focus enough on what's in front of them. How are we going to get past this? What did we learn? And I think that's just really, it's challenging for people. My kids do it, my family does, the people at work do it.
Yeah.
And for me, I am constantly looking at what I'm thinking. And it's taken me years to get
I there's a quote I have is that if only the ceilings could talk.
there.
When we lay down at night and we're trying to sleep, we can't sleep. Those thoughts that are coming all over, that's consuming the evening when we should be asleep, and all those kinds of things. So that's my way of looking at that. So as we close out, one of the goals of the show is to bring people like yourselves, big shots like yourself, to come in
I
and
don't.
tell.
I'm just another bozo on the bus, Ron.
I always use that phrase. My father would always say, when I was getting ready to go out and I'm dressed, he said, "Oh, you think you're a big shot now." So that's always kind of stuck with me. So when I say that you've moved to here, wherever here is there any advice you'd want to leave to our listeners? We have people from across the globe. Let me just do a quick shout out. Peter Piccinini is always here, and he always starts off every Friday morning and say, "Great way to start the weekend." I have my next door neighbor from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Jim Moore, he always hates when I say this. He's a big shot attorney for a trade group in Washington, D.C. Very, very dear friend of mine. So they're always listeners and listening into the show. But if there's a kind of a closing thought that you'd want to give the people as it relates to journey, careers, or whatever it would be, what would you say?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I would encourage people to trust your instincts, but check your sources. I think that's what I would kind of leave people with. You can't live your life just by gut and going with your feelings,
Yeah.
because humans tend to be pretty bad at pattern recognition. So I think you can lead with that, but you need to check your sources, check your data, and be self-reflective. I think that's what I would lead people with.
Okay, cool. Jeff, thank you, man.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ron. This was so fun.
Yeah, this was cool. This was cool because it's been a while, man. I mean, how many years ago was that? I mean, that was umpteen years ago.
I'm
But
gonna
Martha
I'm gonna
Stewart, I was there.
say,
I was there in 2000, from 2000 2009. Yeah, it was my
yeah.
time
So
there.
I left Martha in 2002 or three, I think.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So, but you and we had dinner a couple times in Dubai when I was over there. But I mean, it's been a while. I mean,
Wow. Yeah.
the COVID changed the world as we know it. And I don't know about you, but it totally threw my sense of time off.
Yeah. I
So
know. I
it's
know.
it's been too long. Let's say that.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I need you to hang on. I need to speak to you offline. And for everybody that's
Yeah,
listening
of
in,
course.
thank you for listening in. Share our podcast. Like it, subscribe to it. That's Vadim, who says, long, long,
Oh
long
my
time
God,
ago.
Vadim.
My bad. But we were all part of the same team.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you, everyone, for listening in every Friday morning. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series at 9 a.m., 5 p.m. in Dubai, UAE time. So, Jeff, hold on for a second as we close out. Thank you.
You bet.
The CEO series is more than a conversation. It is a masterclass in leadership. Each episode pulls back the curtains on the real journeys behind success, the pivots, the setbacks, the reinventions. But let's face it, a career is never a straight line. It is a collection of defining moments, hard choices, and quiet resilience. If you find value in these stories and our episodes, help us grow this community. Like the post, share it with someone navigating their own journeys, but follow us to keep learning from the leaders who have walked the walk. Let's continue to inspire, grow, and shape the next generation of bold thinkers, one story at a time, every Friday. If it's Friday, it is the CEO series. Thank you so much for listening.
Take the CEO series with you anywhere, anytime. All episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership.